All right, Facebook, how you doing? Mike Davis here. Just thought I'd come on real quick. I've been meaning to do this for the past few days, and I was busy doing other things. I thought I got to get on and do this because it's something I really believe in and I want to promote. So there has come out a new book. It's been out for, I think, about a week now. And it's a new book by a scholar who has become one of my favorite scholars, Dr. Nijay K. Gupta. This is his book, Tell Her Story: How Women Led, Taught, and Ministered in the Early Church. Okay, I'm trying to get the glare off of there, but this is the name of the book. Dr. Gupta, he is the University of Durham. His PhD is from the University of Durham. He is a professor of New Testament at Northern Seminary. His books include A Beginner's Guide to New Testament Studies, Paul and the Language of Faith, and commentaries on Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. He is co-editor of the special edition of IVP Academics Dictionary of Paul and His Letters, one of my favorite resources, and serves as a senior translator for the New Living Translation, and he blogs at crucialablog.com. So I was able to be part of the launch team for this book, I was very happy and grateful and honored to be a part of that. We read the book, we were able to give comments on the book. I was a little behind at first because of working on different trainings and stuff, and some other projects that we were working on, but I was able to get a few things in here. But I definitely wanted to come on and talk about the book itself. So this is going to be my review of Dr. Nijay Gupta's book, Tell Her Story. Now, I just want to say up front, I was not told when I became part of the launch team that I had to give a positive review. I was under no obligation to do that. I was asked to give an honest review of the book. Now, a lot of you know, if you've been following me on Facebook, especially if you've been seeing the series that we've been doing from our fellowship on Saturday mornings, we call Life from the Oasis, and I've been doing a series called Who's the Boss? Women and Men in Biblical and Cultural Context. And we've been talking about basically the egalitarian and complementarian debate and looking at all of the issues involved with women being in leadership in the home, in the church, in society, what egalitarians have to say about it, and what complementarians have to say about it. And in this book, Dr. Gupta does deal with that, but he does it in what I believe to be a pretty unique way. So in this book, what he does here is it's called Tell Her Story. And what he does is and this is from the book, this is said in the book, he amplifies the voices of women. And I think it's also unique that this came out during the month of March, which has been called the International Women's Month. So in this book, he is amplifying the voices of women that can go unnoticed in the biblical text and in our reading of the biblical text. It's easy to kind of skip over certain things, certain passages where women are named and women are being mentioned. What Dr. Gupta does is he references in the book the movie Hidden Figures. Some of you may know about that movie. This tells the story of 3 Black women in the 1950s who were an integral part of NASA's program, their space program. Now, these women that are talked about in the book and in the movie Hidden Figures, we really didn't know about them until they were highlighted by the book called Hidden Figures and by the movie that's called Hidden Figures. We didn't know about the role that these important women, these Black women, played in the space program. They were only highlighted because someone wrote about them. So their important contributions and the inspiration that their lives could bring would have been lost if the author of the book, Margot Lee Shetterly, had not told their stories. See what I did there? Link that to this here. Okay. If she had not told their stories, we would not have known about these women and we would not have been inspired by them. Other women would not have been inspired by them. Other young ladies and young girls would not have been inspired if someone had not, quote, told their story. So in the same way, what Dr. Gupta has done is he brings out in this book and he tells the stories of key biblical women who have been, quote, hidden figures. They've been hidden figures in the book. And what he does is he highlights them, he highlights their stories, and it serves to inspire us, and it also serves to teach us. So the book is not just inspirational, it is that. But the book is also, it's a teaching book. It is a scholarly book, but let me say immediately, It is a well-written book. Anyone can understand it. It is not so scholarly that it goes over your head or goes over your head. My mentor, Dr. William Bean, he used to always say, one of the problems with scholars is that they tend to write only for other scholars. And I have found that to be true. Now, I love to read the works of other scholars, but sometimes even reading it, you think to yourself, could you make that a little bit more clear what you just said there? Well, Dr. Gupta really does make it clear. He makes it plain. There's not a lot of language where there's no language where you're scratching your head going, what is he talking about here? It is something that anyone can read, anyone can understand. I could give this to my 18-year-old daughter and she would understand it. And my 18-year-old daughter is smart and intelligent. Well, my point here is that this is not something that would fly over her head because it has just so much scholarly and academic language. No, he writes in such a way that he brings the scholarly material. He brings ancient Near Eastern insight into it as in terms of the Old Testament portion, but he also brings the first century Greco-Roman and Jewish culture and helps us to understand some of the women that could be seen as hidden figures. He brings their stories out in the book. And like I said, you're going to be inspired and also you're going to learn a lot. You're going to be taught. Now, he begins the book in the Hebrew scripture. He talks about Deborah, which is a really interesting place to start. He doesn't start with what some of us would call some of the problematic passages about women in the Bible. He starts with the story of Deborah. He doesn't even start with the book of Genesis. He gets to the book of Genesis, but he starts with the story of Deborah. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I was listening to him the other day on a podcast with, I believe it's James Michael Smith. And one of the things that was brought out was a quote, which was attributed to Scott McKnight, who's another scholar. And and I'm going to paraphrase the quote here, but basically the quote went something like this. If we want to know what women can do, we first need to examine what they have already done. And I love that. I wish I would have had that quote when I started my series on Who's the Boss. If we want to understand what women can do, we first need to examine what women have already done. And this is what Dr. Gupta does here. He begins to examine what women have already done. He starts with Deborah, and then from Deborah, he moves on to the story of Adam and Eve. He begins to look at God's original intent for man and women, and then he also begins to look at what happened, how it all began to unravel. Now, in subsequent chapters, he moves to the New Testament, and he begins to look at the women in Jesus' life. He looks at Mary, the mother of Jesus. He looks at Mary Magdalene, and then he looks at other female disciples of Jesus. Yes, the female disciples. If I say to you, the disciples of Jesus, what comes to your mind? If I say the disciples of Jesus, Jesus had disciples, what comes to your mind? What do you see in your mind? What's the image? Do you see men following Jesus? Do you also see women following Jesus? Well, one of the things that Dr. Gupta does, and he shows in the book, is that Jesus had female disciples. And I think that's really important because that by bringing that out and highlighting the fact that Jesus had female disciples, it causes us to begin to read the biblical text, the Gospels, a little bit differently. And we begin to see things that we didn't see before. He's not putting something in the text that's not there. He's reading what is there already in the text. And one of the things that he highlights are the female disciples of Jesus. From there, he moves into the epistles, and he looks at the women that are mentioned by Paul, and he gives a lot of scholarly evidence that these women were not just friends of Paul, they weren't just fellow Christians, they weren't just sisters of the Lord, but these women were also colleagues of Paul. They were leaders with Paul. And again, that is very important. And he brings out some very important facts about first century Greco-Roman life, the lives of women within the first century world, that gives weight to his argument that some of these women that are mentioned briefly in the letters of Paul were not just sisters. They weren't just, women in the back making the sandwiches for the Sunday afternoon brunch after church. I'm being a little bit exaggerating here. I'm doing a little bit exaggerating here, but that these were women who were also serving in a leadership position. To find out what that evidence is, you gotta buy the book, read the book, okay? All right, in the closing chapters of the book, he begins to look at what we call the problematic passages. Some of the, things like, I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over a man. That's one of the things that he covers in the book. Now, a lot of people read these problematic passages as prohibiting the leadership of women, But what he does, what Dr. Gupta does, is provide a much needed context that helps to shape our reading of the text in ways that I believe are much more balanced, much more in keeping with the first century world, and also much more of a healthy reading of the text. So he provides, again, that historical, cultural, academic scholarship that helps us to look at these passages in a little different way. Now, what I mean by that is not, again, that he's reading something into the text that's not there. He's looking at the cultural background. He's looking at, and by the way, he does bring in other scholars and in terms of utilizing their information to give evidence to what he is saying, the points that he's making in the book. Now, again, like I said before, I've been doing a series called Who's the Boss? Women and Men in Biblical and Cultural Context. I've been so far in the Old Testament. I started in the Old Testament and moving towards the New Testament. And I can tell you this, I'm going to be in the New Testament soon. We're going to be talking about women in the New Testament. We're going to be talking about some of those problematic passages. I can tell you that this book is a book that I will be drawing upon, a book that I will definitely be utilizing. One of the goals that we have for the future in our ministry, the Center for Christian Training and Development, we want to start a school of the Bible and a school of ministry for pastors and for other people who want to understand the Bible better. This is definitely, I believe, I'm going to talk with some of the people involved, but I think we're going to have this as one of our textbook that people, and we're going to have a whole, I believe, one of the goals is we're going to have a whole area, I shouldn't say whole area, one of the things that will be taught is a biblical women's study. And I believe this is going to be one of the books that we are definitely going to have as a textbook and require for people to read, because it has a lot of good, solid, academic, scholarly information that people need to know about. So I'm doing this so that you can get this book. You want to buy this book. If you have been following me, and I know somebody said to me the other day, Mike, I'm looking forward when you get to the New Testament. If you don't want to wait until I get to the New Testament, because it's going to be a few weeks before I get there, buy this book. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about, he is talking about here. He gives a great framework. And again, it is easy to understand, even though he is dealing with and he is bringing in scholarly, man, what's wrong with my tongue tonight? He's bringing in academic information that will really help you to understand much better what God has to say about the place of women in life, in the home, in the church, in terms of their leadership. So this is a book you want to buy. Trust me, you will be glad that you did. While it is an easy read, it is a book that truly gives you solid information. So I want to, again, recommend this book, Tell Her Story by Dr. Nijay Gupta. Buy this book. I highly recommend it. Thank you for watching. See you guys later. Bye-bye.